The job of a pastor is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. This same would seem to apply also to the role and the job of a prophet. This morning in our scripture lessons, we have two examples of this prophetic duty, to comfort and to afflict. Our first lesson this morning is from the prophet Isaiah. And Matthew's gospel introduces us to John the Baptist, the voice crying in the wilderness. Now, being a prophet required a person to be, a bit unusual for most folks. A prophet had to be single-minded, courageous, outspoken. And as a result, a prophet was very often unpopular. Very often unpopular, especially when he spoke to those whom he afflicted. And because those whom a prophet often afflicted were the rich, the powerful in society, the job of a prophet was often dangerous. It was never easy to speak the truth to power. And so the life of a prophet would often be short and was always filled with difficulty and hardship. And both Isaiah and John certainly fit that bill. If we read only the second portion of this morning's lesson from Isaiah, we might begin to wonder why he was unpopular. I mean, he speaks about the coming of the Messiah. He speaks about the perfect fulfillment of God's kingdom. He speaks about justice, about righteousness. He speaks of the day when the hurting and the destruction will be no more. What, we may ask, would make a prophet who speaks such good and comforting things unpopular? If, however, we read the first portion of the lesson, the answer becomes a bit clearer. Isaiah wrote, speaking of the coming Messiah, "He shall not judge by what his eyes see or decide by what his ears hear, but his righteousness shall judge the poor and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and the breath of his lips shall kill the wicked." Those are not words of comfort to those in charge, those who exploit the poor, the weak, the widow, the orphan. In fact, they are threatening words. Words which threaten to overturn the whole world as they had set it up for themselves. The words of comfort and peace, the words about the wolf living with the lamb, the leopard lying down with the kid, the little child leading them to the holy mountain, where there will be no more hurting or no more destruction, and the earth being full of the knowledge of the Lord. Those words, those comfortable words, they come later in the passage, and they presuppose that the affliction and the judgment of the wicked, the proud and the exploiter, has already taken place. In our lesson from Matthew's Gospel, we find a similar pattern of affliction and comfort. John spoke words of forgiveness, words of God's mercy, of God's love, to those who came to him in humility and in sincerity. To those, however, who saw themselves as better than others, who prided themselves on being righteous, on being the children of Abraham. For them, John had some very special words of affliction. He called the Pharisees and the Sadducees a brood of vipers, that is to say, a nest of snakes. And he warned against their narrow-minded parochialism, telling them, "Do not presume to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our ancestor,' for I tell you, God is able from these stones to raise up children to Abraham." Such ideas may have helped make John popular with some of the ordinary folks, but they quickly began to make him very unpopular with the religious and the political elites. And it helped to contribute to his untimely death. Sometimes we think of a prophet as being someone who foretells the future. kind of like an oracle or a fortune teller. And there are instances of this kind of prophecy in Scripture. But the main job of a prophet, the main role of a prophet, the important thing about prophecy isn't foretelling the future. It's simply about telling the truth. And I would submit that it is this truth-telling function that got the prophets, John, Isaiah, Jeremiah, you name them, into trouble. In John's Gospel, Jesus said, "The truth will set you free." He didn't, however, say, "Will always make you happy to hear it." That was certainly the case with the Sadducees and the Pharisees in today's Gospel. And that is because sometimes the truth makes us uncomfortable. It forces us to see things about ourselves, about our world, that we'd rather not have to see. Because if we see them, we might have to deal with them. And if we have to deal with them, well, that means we might have to change. And none of us are really very comfortable with change. In Adult Ed this Advent, as you know, we are using as our program a study based on Charles Dickens' famous story, A Christmas Carol. In the story, again, as you know, the old miser, Ebenezer Scrooge, is haunted by a series of ghosts. Now, I would suggest to you that the ghosts in Dickens' tale exercise that prophetic function of afflicting and even comforting. Scrooge, before the coming of the ghosts, was actually very comfortable with himself and the way he lived. Now that is, of course, until the ghosts made him see the truth about himself. The truth that in reality he was nothing but a lonely, bitter old man who, despite all of his accumulated wealth, had no friends, no meaningful family relationships, no real joy in his life, and ultimately no hope, either for this life or for the next. And it was only when he had accepted these hard and bitter truths that he could begin to embrace real hope with faith for a new future and begin to be able to change. Now, Dickens' A Christmas Carol and the characters found in it, Scrooge, Marley, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, they're literary creations. They're not part of Scripture. But they do speak to us of some very scriptural truths. And while none of us here this morning is much like old Ebenezer, at least I hope not, we all have the need to be open to the truth when we hear it, even if it's hard to hear. We all need to have enough faith and enough hope to change when we are called to do so. Advent is not, as I know I've said before, a mini Lent. But it is, like Lent, a time of preparation. And our preparation takes the form of listening to the prophets, whether the Old Testament kind or perhaps others. It is a time for hope. It is a time for faith, because we prepare not only for the coming of the Feast of Christmas, the celebration of the Incarnation, that is to say, the coming of God as one of us, but as a time to embrace and to testify to the reality of God among us, as one of us, and to do that by the way we live. To Him who is the hope of the prophets and the joy of the angels, be all honor, power, and glory, now and forever.
Amen.